Hey everybody, this is Perch. We talk about Spider-Man MJ a lot here. I mean, hell, not just here, everywhere in comics. It continues to be kind of the more puzzling aspects of modern comics, and maybe kind of I don't know, the shining spotlight of where things have gone awry. Is the Peter Mary Jane marriage, dissolving, and then Marvel kind of steadfastly sticking by that decision. Well, here's a reader who has a solution, the actual problem and a solution. He claims. Let's see what it says. It says, "Dear Reverend Dr. Perch O'Perchington." Nice. That's a new one. "Regarding your recent video about Marvel's resistance to Peter and Mary Jane marriage, I have some thoughts about why it might actually be an issue, what that says about the larger comic industry, and a proposed solution." Nice. We're going to do all three things. You're a good consultant there. First, the story of Spider-Man is a Bildungsroman. It is about a boy becoming a man. I'm sure I said that incorrectly, but I'm not familiar with that term. I'm not. That's weird. The origin story by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko address that pretty directly. Yes, did. Getting married and especially becoming a father are the traditional and appropriate markers of emerging from boyhood into manhood. So Peter marrying MJ was, in fact, in a sense, the beginning of the end of Spider-Man's story. Now, the Sony Spider-Verse films have extended and complicated that with parallel dimensions of Miles Morales, but I think the basic point stands. I'm with you so far, but I do have a disagreement, but we're going to get further into this mail to see kind of where this all goes. Second, the problem of essentially ending a story of a major character is almost inevitable when a comic runs for 70 or more years. There are certain events that are baked into the premise of any character, so some of those events are uniquely impactful. You cannot expect every writer to force those events forever. You can, the trend started as far back as 1983 when Jan Strand pointed out that maybe Ray Palmer and Gene Loring didn't have the best relationship in Sword of the Atom. Since Loring was effectively the entire supporting cast of Silver Age Atom comic that essentially ended Ray Palmer's story. But the trend accelerated when Alan Moore wrote Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Other writers saw a possibility of resolving long-running character arcs. Finally, then, a solution. Okay? As you have pointed out, very little has emerged over 3 decades to replace the centrality of the Marvel and DC characters in the Silver Age vintage. Even most successful mantle passes have largely flamed out, along with earlier reimaginings, like the original Ultimate line. That is saying nothing of truly original ideas. So what do you do in the core of your business when the bulk of your main continuity consists of stories that are mostly over? I'd suggest the big two break their lines into, say, 4 separate timelines with a set of around 12 titles in each. That turns your problem into a virtue. If everyone roughly knows how the Spider-Man story goes, and use that familiarity to fill in the narrative. To be fair, I think that's what they've been doing with some of the Peter David series at Marvel, where they'll come in and they'll tell like stories that are kind of set continuity-wise from his time in the Hulk, or the symbiote Spider-Man stories, or some of those things. It kind of is that, tales from that time approach. Which is fine. But they don't tend to sell well. They don't tend to sell well because readers like, this won't matter because I know where the story is going. And even though you have some pretty top tier talent in there, I mean, your mileage may vary on like somebody like Greg Land. He is one of the better selling artists, and Peter David is one of the better selling writers. And so in theory, that should have worked. But again, it's a story that already feels baked. And so that creates a conflict. But anyway, I put that as me. Let's finish up this mail and we can get more into it. Okay, so 12 titles, separate timelines around 12 titles in each. This turns your problems into virtue. Okay, tell stories in the Betty Brant era, the Gwen Stacy era, the MJ era, and during their marriage. But, and this is critical, it cannot be an untold tales of Spider-Man. True. Okay, it needs to be able to cross over with Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the X-Men, and similar developmental points. The Betty Brant era needs to have an FF book before Reed and Sue are married and have kids themselves, etc. 12 titles seems to be big enough to feel like a universe, but small enough that someone could read everything. Okay, that's mail. All right, some interesting ideas there. I think... first off, let me just throw this out there. The idea that you take your line and you basically say, look, I'm having trouble getting new characters going. I've got a lot of really popular eras I could tell more stories from. I don't want those stories to be meaningless, so let's actually set the universe up that way. That's not a bad idea. It could be done. It would require rock star level of editing and quality control, and it would also require commitment. Now, the benefits, if you get it right, are that then you could take these kind of different eras of the comic universe, you could flesh them out more, and you could arguably make a lot more movies on it. Your media empire could grow significantly during that time period. But it's not simple, and it requires a lot of talent, and it will require some money, and it will require determination, and it requires somebody who has a steady hand on the wheel and sees it through. And comics just tend to not show any of those things on a regular basis. So it's a good idea, but it's a risky idea in the sense that you have to have talent to pull it off. And I haven't seen that level of orchestrational talent in comics in quite some time. So that's one big hiccup. Um, the second is I still, despite your best efforts, I think it's still going to feel like the only stuff that really counts is the current stuff, and the rest feels like stepping in back in time. So you have to really do some heavy marketing and branding and work in order to make those things feel important and truly important. And it has to require some really clever creative people to do it, and you're gonna have to pay some money in order to attract people who can do that. You're also gonna have to attract people who have a deep love for those eras, and that I think is the other problem. Is a lot of people who love that time period and could write good stories on them were frankly older creators that were writing those stories, and they're older and they're going back to the era they love the most. That's not necessarily a problem. I like the fact they're going to get some work, but there's just a finite number of those people, and they're going to age, and so you gotta have a plan there. Um, so all that now, these are all the problems with it. I think I want to go back to the start of the mail and see what the rest of you think. You made a comment about how Spider-Man is a story from a boy to a man. It's very much baked into the great power comes great responsibility and a lot of things he's learning, and I agree with that point. But I don't agree it's at its end. I think that the story from a boy to a man, you could spend a lot more time in the man part of that. And by and large, particularly since the Dan Slott era and the Brand New Day and all that kind of stuff, there was a lot less Peter Parker the man. I think that what happened is that we actually basically killed Peter in a sense of his growth and development, and everything that made him a character kind of died with that reboot of erasing the marriage and everything else. We were seeing the transition of a boy becoming a man, becoming a father, and I mean, you can get decades more stories out of that, but instead we rebooted Peter to this odd era that is just trapped him, where now he actually can't become a man ever. He's stuck as like pre-man, more than a boy, not a man. Like he's stuck in a really effed up place where we're just supposed to kind of feel sorry for him all the time because he's a loser. Like it's actually, I think the in the grand scheme of things, if you look at comics, say 20 years from now, and you're able to look back at this entire era, I suspect you'll be able to honestly say that the one more day and kind of all that stuff, or one moment in time, and that whole storyline that they've been messing around with in the last 20-25 years is one of the biggest character assassinations and IP destroying decisions in media, not just in comics. I mean, it's like Lars Ulrich, going to war with people who sample and cover Metallica will pale in comparison to the brand damage that I think has been done to Spider-Man over the years. But that's a weird analogy to bring out. But your point is taken. I think several of these comics, there gets to this point where if the core journey is, becoming an adult, learning what it takes, getting that responsibility, Superman, stranger in a strange land, figure out how to, protect and serve when you're kind of a hero, but you're not of them. Batman's journey to fight crime in his own way and come to accept family again. A lot of those things, you have these moments. I remember thinking this was Scott Snyder's Batman run, where it's like there was the embrace of the family, kind of in that the death of the family storyline, some of the other things, whereas that Batman needs the people around him. And when that storyline hits and it's done and we've seen it and he's accepted it, where do you go with Batman from there? Is a character kind of, deprecating at that point? Is there anything left? It's a good question. I think I just think there's a lot more stories to be told. We did not get in the Marvel universe the story of Peter Parker, settling in, basically overcoming his fears of what it means to be a father with all the danger around him. Mary Jane settling into, here's her identity with Peter, having a child, raising that child. Like there's a lot of moments. I mean, years and years of moments. Think about the Fantastic Four. Yeah, there was a big era where Reed and Sue are not married. They get married. They have Franklin. Um, I mean, I just described like 30 plus years, 40 years. I mean, actually more than that. Hell, I think close to 50 years is what I just taught, what I just mentioned. So there's just a lot that can be done. And I think they moved too quickly to we've told everything we want to tell. We might as well reboot him to Nowhere Land. I mean, that's kind of the problem. So, I mean, yes, I do think doing kind of an imprint or part of the universe where you could tell stories in these eras, you still get to milk and mine and get stuff out of Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and Captain America and all these characters. It's not a bad idea. I think that the biggest problem with evolution is that it needs to be evolution. What I mean by that is if you look at the Ed Brubaker Captain America story as an example, you had Steve Rogers in that role. Steve Rogers is questioning things in America. He realizes Bucky is still alive from the Winter Soldier stuff. This is a sneaking plot with Red Skull. He ultimately dies. The mantle passes to Bucky. He comes back. Captain America takes the mantle back. Eventually, it makes its way to Sam Wilson. If you look at the Brubaker and Remender runs, there was a lot of work put into how those characters evolved. And every time they got somewhere, it's almost the exact same thing as when they yanked away the marriage. They had built up Bucky, then they'd built up Sam. And rather than saying, all right, we're going to find Steve Rogers' new place in this universe, we're going to start to build some lore and some stories around Sam Wilson, very, very quickly, they're like, whoop, nope, put him back in. We got to have the same old Captain America. They aborted their own evolution. And then they complained that the fans don't accept evolution. The Brubaker run sold well. The Remender run sold well. It's not like those sales were off a cliff and they had to do something drastic to bring back Steve Rogers, the original Captain America. If they had actually invested and shown how Steve Rogers is moving on to this next phase of his life, and Sam Wilson is figuring out how to be a different kind of hero, and same thing with Bucky, like all this stuff. I don't know if it made great comics, but it have been worth a shot. And instead, the comic companies aborted all that and then complain that it's the fans that don't accept things. Well, you didn't give the fans a chance. The Fantastic Four, comic in the 60s I love the John Byrne run of that. That was 20 years later. We got the John Byrne run. So, like 20 years of character development. You're going to try, Bucky as Cap for 18 months and then be like, there's nothing we could do. It's fucked. I mean, come on. Right? Anyway, interesting comment. What do the rest of y'all you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course. And thanks for listening.